Keisha Johnson endured the cruel laughter of wealthy executives who mocked her facial scars every Tuesday at Ray's Diner, calling her damaged goods and worse. But when veteran James Wright spotted the 82nd Airborne tattoo hidden beneath her sleeve, he realized the broken waitress was actually a decorated combat medic with a dangerous plan. Ray's Diner occupied a corner lot in downtown Portland, its red vinyl booths and checkered floor tiles unchanged since the 1960s. The morning rush brought a mix of blue-collar workers grabbing coffee before their shifts and business executives conducting informal meetings over eggs and bacon. The smell of grease and fresh coffee filled the air, while the clatter of dishes and the hiss of the grill provided a soundtrack to conversations that ranged from local gossip to million-dollar deals. Large windows facing the street allowed natural light to illuminate the worn but clean interior, where framed photographs of local sports teams and military units decorated the walls in a tribute to community pride. Keisha Johnson moved through Ray's Diner with the efficient grace of someone who had learned to navigate hostile environments with minimal exposure to danger. At 32, she carried herself with a quiet dignity that contrasted sharply with the cruel comments that followed her from table to table. The scars that marked the left side of her face and neck were the most visible reminders of her past, but they were far from the only evidence of experiences that had shaped her into someone much more complex than her current role suggested. Her uniform, a simple black dress with a white apron, was always immaculate. Her movements precise and economical in ways that spoke of training that went beyond restaurant service. The way she assessed each table before approaching, the subtle positioning that kept her back to walls when possible, and the calm efficiency with which she handled even the most difficult customers suggested a background that had prepared her for challenges far more serious than demanding diners. What her tormentors couldn't see was the tactical mind that processed every insult, cataloged every cruel comment, and built comprehensive profiles of the people who thought they were breaking her spirit. Keisha's apparent vulnerability was carefully constructed camouflage that concealed capabilities and intentions that would have terrified the executives who found such pleasure in her supposed helplessness. Keisha's position at Ray's Diner wasn't the result of limited opportunities or lack of education. It was a carefully chosen assignment that allowed her to gather intelligence on a group of business executives whose discriminatory practices had destroyed careers and violated federal law. Her apparent vulnerability and the cruel entertainment that her scars provided to men like Davidson made her invisible in the way that only the dismissed and dehumanized could be, giving her access to conversations and admissions that would never have been shared in the presence of someone they considered a threat or equal. The decision that would define Keisha's mission came 6 months earlier, when she learned that Davidson's company, Mitchell and Associates, had systematically fired 3 veterans for disabilities related to their military service, while covering up their discrimination through falsified performance reviews and manufactured misconduct charges. The veterans, 2 suffering from PTSD and 1 dealing with traumatic brain injury, had been discarded like broken equipment, their careers destroyed and their reputations damaged by lies designed to protect the company from legal consequences. Keisha's background as a combat medic with the 82nd Airborne had given her intimate knowledge of the challenges faced by wounded warriors returning to civilian life, and Davidson's treatment of disabled veterans represented exactly the kind of injustice that her post-military career had been designed to address. Her work with veteran advocacy organizations had taught her that traditional legal approaches often failed when companies had resources to fight lengthy court battles and silence victims through financial pressure. The opportunity to infiltrate Davidson's circle came when she learned that he and his associates held regular Tuesday morning meetings at Ray's Diner, conducting business in the casual environment where they felt comfortable speaking freely about practices they would never discuss in their corporate offices. Kesha's strategy was based on principles she had learned during intelligence operations in Afghanistan: patience, invisibility, and the systematic collection of evidence that would be impossible to deny or explain away. Her plan required her to become exactly what Davidson and his associates expected: a damaged woman grateful for any employment, too broken to pose a threat and too desperate to complain about mistreatment. The role required her to endure verbal abuse that would have broken most people. But Kesha's military training had prepared her for psychological warfare far more sophisticated than the crude insults of entitled businessmen. Every cruel comment was recorded in her memory and later transcribed into detailed reports that documented patterns of behavior and revealed character traits that would be crucial when the evidence was eventually presented. Her cover story was carefully constructed to explain her scars while concealing her military background, a car accident that had left her disfigured and desperate for work, grateful for any employer willing to hire someone whose appearance might disturb customers. The story was believable because it contained enough truth to be convincing while omitting details that would have revealed her true capabilities and intentions. Kesha's first encounter with Davidson's group established the dynamic that would define their relationship for the next 6 months. The executive's reaction to her appearance was immediate and predictable, a mixture of disgust, pity, and cruel amusement that revealed character flaws that would eventually destroy their careers and reputations. "Jesus Christ," Davidson had said loudly enough for the entire diner to hear. "What happened to your face? You look like you went through a blender." The comment drew laughter from his associates and uncomfortable silence from other customers. But Kesha's response was exactly what her training had taught her: to project embarrassment, shame, and grateful acceptance of any attention, even negative attention, from people she perceived as superior. "I'm sorry, sir," she had replied quietly, her voice carrying just the right mixture of humility and pain. "I was in an accident. I know I'm not much to look at, but I really need this job." Davidson's reaction to her response revealed the sadistic pleasure he took in the suffering of others and established the pattern of abuse that would continue for months, while Kesha gathered the evidence that would eventually destroy him. The systematic documentation of Davidson's discriminatory behavior began with Kesha's careful observation of his treatment of other employees and customers who didn't meet his standards of acceptability. Her military intelligence training had taught her to recognize patterns and build comprehensive profiles of targets, skills that proved invaluable in understanding the scope of Davidson's prejudices and illegal practices. During her first month at Ray's Diner, Kesha witnessed Davidson and his associates making derogatory comments about employees with disabilities, minorities, and anyone they perceived as inferior to their social and economic status. The conversations revealed a corporate culture that systematically excluded and discriminated against protected classes, while maintaining a public facade of diversity and inclusion. "Look at that idiot," Davidson said during one particularly revealing conversation, pointing to a customer with obvious mobility issues. "Why do these people even bother leaving the house? They're just taking up space that normal people could use." The comment was recorded in Kesha's memory, along with dozens of others that painted a picture of systematic discrimination and violation of federal civil rights laws. Her ability to remain invisible while these conversations took place gave her access to admissions that would have been impossible to obtain through traditional investigation methods. The breakthrough in Kesha's intelligence gathering came when James Wright, a Vietnam veteran who frequented Ray's diner, began to notice details about her behavior that suggested military training. Wright's own combat experience had taught him to recognize the subtle signs of someone who had served in hostile environments, and Kesha's hypervigilance, tactical positioning, and controlled responses to stress marked her as a fellow veteran. Wright's initial observations were casual, the way Kesha scanned rooms before entering, her preference for seats with clear sight lines to exits, and the controlled breathing techniques she used when dealing with particularly stressful situations. But his suspicions were confirmed when he caught a glimpse of the 82nd Airborne tattoo on her forearm during a moment when her sleeve rode up while she was reaching for a high shelf. The recognition created a dilemma for Wright, who understood that revealing Kesha's military background could compromise whatever operation she was conducting, but who also felt obligated to offer support to a fellow veteran who was clearly enduring systematic abuse. His decision to approach her discreetly would prove crucial to the success of her mission and the eventual exposure of Davidson's crimes. Wright's approach to Kesha was subtle and careful, using military terminology and references that would be meaningless to civilians, but would clearly identify him as a fellow veteran to someone with the appropriate background. His method was to leave small tips with notes that contained references to military units, operations, and values that would resonate with someone who had served. "Airborne," Wright wrote on one receipt, using the greeting that identified him as someone who understood the significance of Kesha's unit affiliation. "Semper Fi" from a grateful Marine who recognizes a warrior when he sees one. Kesha's response was equally subtle, a slight nod of acknowledgement that confirmed Wright's assessment while maintaining her cover. The communication established a connection between two veterans that would prove invaluable as her operation moved into its final phases. Wright's recognition of her true identity also provided Kesha with a potential ally who could serve as a witness to Davidson's behavior and provide corroboration for the evidence she was gathering. His presence at the diner as a regular customer gave him access to conversations and incidents that could support her eventual testimony and provide additional credibility to her accusations. The final phase of Kesha's operation required her to provoke Davidson into making the kind of explicit admissions that would be impossible to deny or explain away in court. Her strategy was to create situations where his true attitudes about discrimination and civil rights would be revealed in ways that could be documented and verified by independent witnesses. Her approach was to gradually increase the pressure on Davidson by subtly challenging his authority and dignity in ways that would trigger his need to reassert dominance through increasingly explicit expressions of his prejudices. The technique required careful calibration, enough provocation to elicit revealing responses without creating suspicion about her true motives or capabilities. The plan also required coordination with Wright, who agreed to serve as a witness and provide additional documentation of Davidson's behavior through his own observations and recordings. Their collaboration represented the kind of veteran solidarity that transcended service branches and conflicts, united by shared values and commitment to justice. As Kesha prepared for the confrontation that would expose Davidson's crimes, she drew on the same mental preparation techniques that had sustained her through combat operations in Afghanistan. Understanding that the mission's success depended on her ability to maintain her cover while gathering the evidence that would destroy her target's career and reputation. The crisis that would test Kesha's operational discipline came when Davidson's abuse escalated beyond verbal cruelty to physical intimidation, creating a situation that threatened to expose her true capabilities while providing the evidence she needed to complete her mission. The incident began when Davidson, emboldened by alcohol and frustrated by a failed business deal, decided that Kesha's presence was somehow responsible for his misfortunes. "You know what your problem is," Davidson snarled, grabbing Kesha's wrist as she attempted to refill his coffee. "You're a constant reminder that the world is full of broken, useless people who should just disappear." The physical contact triggered responses that Kesha had to consciously suppress muscle memory from hand-to-hand combat training that would have allowed her to disable Davidson before he could react. But maintaining her cover required her to accept the assault while ensuring that it was witnessed and documented by others present in the diner. Wright, observing from his regular table, recognized the danger in the situation and began recording the incident on his phone while preparing to intervene if Davidson's aggression escalated beyond what Kesha could safely endure. His military training had taught him to recognize when situations were approaching critical thresholds, and Davidson's behavior was clearly moving toward violence that could no longer be ignored. The moment represented the convergence of months of planning with the unpredictable reality of human behavior under stress. Testing Kesha's ability to maintain her mission while protecting herself from genuine physical danger, the confrontation reached its climax when Davidson, drunk on both alcohol and the power he believed he held over Kesha, made the explicit admissions that she had been working months to obtain. His verbal assault combined personal cruelty with professional confessions that revealed the full scope of his discriminatory practices and illegal activities. "You want to know why I fired those veterans?" Davidson said, his voice loud enough to be heard throughout the diner. "Because damaged goods like you and them are bad for business. Customers don't want to see broken people when they're trying to enjoy themselves. PTSD, missing limbs, ugly scars, all of it reminds them that the world is a dangerous place." The admission was exactly what Kesha needed: a clear statement of discriminatory intent that violated federal civil rights laws and provided grounds for criminal prosecution as well as civil liability. But Davidson wasn't finished revealing the depth of his crimes. "I've got lawyers who know how to make problem employees disappear," he continued, apparently unaware that his words were being recorded by multiple witnesses. Fake performance reviews, manufactured misconduct charges, whatever it takes to get rid of people who don't fit our corporate image. Wright's recording captured every word, while other customers looked on in shock at the casual admission of systematic discrimination and fraud. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. But Kesha's most challenging moment came when Davidson's verbal assault became personal and specific. "Look at you," he said with obvious disgust. "Scarred, desperate, probably living in some welfare apartment. You're exactly the kind of person who makes America weak. You should be grateful that anyone is willing to employ damaged goods like you." The moment when Kesha's cover was finally blown came not from her own actions, but from Wright's decision that he could no longer watch a fellow veteran endure abuse without intervening. His military training had taught him that there were times when mission parameters had to be adjusted to protect personnel, and Davidson's escalating aggression had reached that threshold. "That's enough," Wright said, rising from his table with the bearing of someone who had commanded respect in far more dangerous situations than a small-town diner. "You're talking to a decorated combat veteran who served her country with honor while you were probably hiding behind a desk somewhere." The revelation that Kesha was a veteran sent shock waves through the diner as customers began to understand the true nature of what they had been witnessing. Davidson's reaction was immediate and revealing not shame or apology, but anger at being deceived and challenged by someone he had considered beneath his notice. "A veteran," Davidson sneered. "So what? That just makes her damaged military surplus. The Army probably threw her away just like I'm going to throw her away." The words sealed Davidson's fate, providing the final piece of evidence that would destroy his career and expose the systematic discrimination that had destroyed the lives of countless veterans and other vulnerable employees. The revelation of Kesha's military background transformed the dynamic in Ray's diner as customers who had witnessed months of abuse began to understand the true scope of what they had been observing. Wright's intervention provided the catalyst for Kesha to finally drop her carefully maintained cover and reveal the operation she had been conducting for the past 6 months. "Ladies and gentlemen," Kesha announced, her voice carrying the authority and confidence that she had been forced to suppress for months. "My name is Kesha Johnson, former Staff Sergeant, 82nd Airborne Division, combat medic with 3 tours in Afghanistan. For the past 6 months, I've been documenting systematic discrimination and civil rights violations by Mr. Davidson and his company. It led the transformation from submissive waitress to confident military professional was dramatic and immediate, her posture straightening, her voice gaining strength, and her bearing reflecting the training and experience that had been hidden beneath her carefully constructed facade. Wright's support provided additional credibility to her revelations. His own military record and reputation in the community lending weight to the accusations that would soon destroy Davidson's career and expose the criminal conspiracy that had victimized veterans and other protected classes. Despite the success of her operation and the overwhelming evidence she had gathered, Kesha experienced moments of uncertainty. about whether the personal cost of her mission had been worth the potential benefits. 6 months of enduring systematic abuse and humiliation had taken a psychological toll that would require time and support to heal. Even though her military training had prepared her for the psychological warfare she had endured, her concerns were both professional and personal professional, because she understood that her methods, while effective, had pushed the boundaries of legal and ethical conduct, and personal, because the hatred and cruelty she had absorbed had left emotional wounds that might prove more difficult to heal than the physical scars that had provided her cover. But the evidence she had gathered represented justice for veterans who had been victimized by Davidson's discrimination, and the broader impact of exposing his crimes would protect future victims from similar treatment. The climactic confrontation began when Kesha produced the recording device that had been hidden in her uniform for months, documenting every conversation, every cruel comment, and every admission of discriminatory intent that Davidson and his associates had made in her presence. The device represented hundreds of hours of evidence that would prove impossible to deny or explain away in court. "Mr. Davidson," Kesha announced, her voice carrying clearly throughout the diner, "everything you've said for the past 6 months has been recorded and documented. Your admissions of discriminatory hiring and firing practices, your violations of federal civil rights laws, and your systematic abuse of veterans and other protected classes have all been captured on audio and corroborated by independent witnesses." The revelation that Davidson had been unknowingly confessing to federal crimes for months sent shock waves through the assembled crowd as the full scope of Kesha's operation became clear. Davidson's initial response was denial and threats, his legal training telling him to minimize his exposure, while his anger drove him to make additional incriminating statements that only strengthened the case against him. His attempt to intimidate Kesha and discredit her evidence revealed the same arrogance and sense of entitlement that had led him to commit the crimes in the first place. "You think anyone will believe a damaged veteran over a successful businessman?" Davidson snarled. "I'll destroy you in court. I'll make sure you never work again." Us. But his threats only provided additional evidence of retaliatory intent, while demonstrating his continued commitment to the discriminatory attitudes that had already been thoroughly documented. Wright's recording of the confrontation ensured that Davidson's threats would be preserved along with his earlier admissions, creating an unbreakable chain of evidence that would support both criminal and civil prosecutions. The turning point came when Kesha revealed the full scope of her investigation, including evidence of Davidson's company's systematic discrimination against not just veterans, but multiple protected classes, financial fraud related to falsified performance reviews, and conspiracy to violate federal civil rights laws. "Mr. Davidson," Kesha announced, "your company has violated the Americans with Disabilities Act, the Civil Rights Act, and multiple federal employment laws. The evidence includes recorded admissions, falsified documents, and testimony from victims who were afraid to come forward until now." The revelation that Kesha's operation had been part of a broader investigation involving federal agencies and civil rights organizations transformed the confrontation from a personal dispute into the exposure of a criminal conspiracy that had operated for years with impunity. Davidson's reaction was immediate and self-destructive. his attempts to minimize his crimes only providing additional evidence of his guilt and his continued commitment to the discriminatory practices that had already been thoroughly documented. "So what if I fired a few damaged veterans?" he said, apparently unaware that his words were being recorded by multiple witnesses. They were bad for business, and business comes first. The climax of Kesha's operation came when she announced that the evidence had already been forwarded to federal prosecutors, civil rights organizations, and media outlets that would ensure Davidson's crimes received appropriate attention and punishment. "Mr. Davidson," Kesha said, with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had achieved a difficult mission objective, "your company's clients have already been notified about your discriminatory practices. Your business relationships are being terminated, and federal investigators are reviewing your financial records for evidence of fraud and conspiracy." The systematic destruction of Davidson's career and reputation was swift and comprehensive, demonstrating the power of carefully gathered evidence and the importance of holding powerful people accountable for their crimes against vulnerable populations. Wright's support and the testimony of other witnesses ensured that Kesha's evidence would be corroborated and that Davidson's attempts to discredit her would fail in the face of overwhelming proof of his guilt. Davidson's downfall was swift and comprehensive, with his law firm losing major clients within days of the evidence becoming public and federal investigators opening criminal proceedings that would eventually result in significant fines and prison time. The systematic discrimination that had destroyed the careers of multiple veterans was exposed in detail, leading to compensation for victims and policy changes designed to prevent similar abuses. Kesha's courage in enduring months of abuse to gather evidence inspired other victims of workplace discrimination to come forward, creating a wave of accountability that extended far beyond Davidson's individual crimes. The case became a model for how systematic discrimination could be exposed and prosecuted, with Kesha's methods being studied and adapted by civil rights organizations across the country. Ray's Diner, where the confrontation had taken place, became a symbol of justice and veteran solidarity, with the owner establishing a policy of providing free meals to veterans and displaying photographs of local military heroes, including Kesha, who had demonstrated that service to country continued long after military careers ended. The case led to significant changes in federal civil rights enforcement, with new resources dedicated to investigating systematic discrimination and protecting veterans from employment-related retaliation. Kesha's evidence-gathering techniques were incorporated into training programs for civil rights investigators, while her story inspired legislation that strengthened protections for disabled veterans in the workplace. Davidson's conviction and the exposure of his company's crimes created a deterrent effect that influenced business practices across multiple industries, with companies implementing new policies to prevent discrimination and ensure compliance with federal civil rights laws. The case also highlighted the ongoing challenges faced by veterans with visible disabilities and the importance of supporting their transition to civilian employment. Kesha herself became a prominent advocate for veteran rights, using her experience to help other veterans navigate workplace discrimination and fight for the respect and opportunities they had earned through their military service. 2 years after the confrontation at Ray's Diner, Kesha returned to the restaurant for a celebration dinner with Wright and other veterans who had been inspired by her courage to fight their own battles against discrimination. The scars on her face remained, but they were no longer sources of shame or targets for cruelty. They had become symbols of strength and resilience that inspired others to overcome their own challenges. "You know," Wright said as they shared a meal in the same booth where Davidson had once tormented her, "those scars tell a story of courage that goes far beyond any military decoration." Kesha's response reflected the wisdom and perspective that had carried her through both combat and the civilian battles that followed. Every scar tells a story. The question is whether we let that story define us or whether we use it to define ourselves.